Hello, everyone, and welcome to Disinformation in the Influencer Age, a webinar hosted by the Arthur W. Page Center. My name is Gary Sheffer, and I've been a member of the Center's advisory board since 2016. I've stuck around so long because I really love the Center's focus on integrity in public communications. And I love the way they put it into action. We do the research, we look for insights, and then we apply it to the practice. And that's what we're going to talk about here today. Specifically, we're going to explore pressing topics that impact nearly every corner of public communication: the rise of AI, the prevalence and effects of disinformation, and the increased authority of influencers as trusted sources of information. Our central question today is, how can organizations collaborate with influencers to combat disinformation? Here to answer that question are Page Center scholars Staci Smith and Brian Smith of the University of Mississippi, and Beaudine Verhoek, a strategic communications officer at the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. They will share insights from a unique project they conducted this past year. The project originated from a Page Center research call that funded collaborations between scholars and practitioners. They'll share with us what they learned and offer insights and next steps for implementing and maintaining effective strategies for working with influencers. And specifically, we sort of have 4 segments today, maybe 4.5. There'll be a summary of the research and definitions. We're going to talk about AI and information threats, then influencers and information threats, and then what this all means for practitioners. And at the end, we're going to talk to you about becoming involved in this initiative to fight misinformation and disinformation. So before I pass it over to our speakers so they can introduce themselves, I want to encourage our viewers to share their questions on the chat, and we'll try to go through a few of those during the discussion. And there will be time near the end of our session for Q&A as well. So now I'm going to turn it over to our speakers and ask them, Brian, Staci, and Beaudine, to introduce themselves, including Beaudine describing her role at NATO. Staci, why don't you go first?
Great. Yeah, I'm Dr. Staci Smith. I am visiting faculty here at the University of Mississippi. My research looks at public relations, crisis, and social impact. I am the editor for Research Methods for the Marginalized, and I am the co-creator of the study, the research that we will be talking about today.
Brian?
Yeah, so Brian Smith, professor, department chair in integrated marketing communications here at the University of Mississippi. Also involved with this research, obviously co-creator, also the editor of the International Journal of Strategic Communication, among other fantastic experiences I've had. So happy to be here.
Terrific. And Beaudine?
Hi, everyone. Let me start by saying that it's an absolute pleasure to join you today. And let me also convey my sincere thanks to the center, to the organizers for having me on board during this important discussion. So my name is Beaudine Verhoek, and I work as a strategic communications officer in the Office of Strategic Communications at NATO headquarters here in Brussels. I've been with NATO for almost 10 years, and I'm responsible in my job for overseeing the implementation of strategic communications priorities for our director. And this is in the areas of societal resilience, the Western Balkans, hybrid, and countering information threats.
Hey, terrific. Really happy to have you with us, Beaudine. Thank you so much, and as well as Staci and Brian. So I'm going to turn it over to Staci and Brian now. For you guys to talk about the research and its impetus, what led to it. And as you do that, I guess we better define some terms that we're going to be talking about today. But let's go through the research first.
Sure, yeah. So this started, I was a Fulbright scholar in Slovenia. And Brian and I both got invited to come and do a training at the NATO Strategic Communication Center of Excellence in Riga. And part of this, we discussed some different things that we could do together. And one of the main purposes of the study was to understand and how to reach these youth and young adults and help them to build misinformation resilience. And one of these ways that this happens is with influencers. And so we had chatted with the NATO Center in Riga and talked about doing research together. And they had already used up all of their funding for the year. And so we were like, oh, how are we going to do this? And the Page Center at the same time came out with a call for research to do with practitioners. And so it was really like the perfect timing for it all to come together. And we put in a proposal and said, we would like to do this. We would like to work with NATO and work on this building misinformation resilience with youth and young adults. And they agreed to it. And we were just felt so honored to be a part of that. And then fast forward 2 years later, this past summer, we went to the NATO Center headquarters with Beaudine and did a presentation with her team and talked about some of the findings that we have with this research. So a little bit of background on the research that we did. So first, we were looking at the relationship between government communicators and influencers. And so we interviewed 12 government communicators and 9 influencers in areas facing significant misinformation, including the US, Ukraine, Europe, specifically Poland and Slovakia. The influencers were recruited from a purchased political influencer list and through convenient sampling.
Yeah, and so we had another part of this research as well, that we worked with Angela Dwyer and Full Intel to work on some AI, looking at how AI affects this spread of misinformation through influencers. And we looked at, just kind of briefly to talk about it, we looked at a couple of things happened last summer in the presidential debates, specifically the attempted assassination of Donald Trump and the announcement of Kamala Harris's candidacy for president. So we went through a bunch of different misinformation potential, looked at a ton of ex posts and analyzed those. Also, to kind of add in here, we had also worked with, need to mention Mario Nicolini, who worked with the NATO Center of Excellence for Strategic Communication. And so Mario and Beaudine have been instrumental in bringing this research to pass.
Terrific. So why don't we go through some of the results that you found? But I did want to mention the definition of one term, information threats, which runs through this. If you guys could, before you talk about what you found in the research, that's a little bit of a different phrase than we use in the US.
Yeah.
Related to mis and disinformation.
Certainly, yeah. No, we usually talk about it as misinformation and disinformation, right? And there's just a simple, well, not really simple. There's a difference between disinformation, right? It's the intent to do harm and the motive behind it, which is often hard to measure, right? Is someone intending to do harm, or are they just spreading misinformation because they just, aren't sure about it, or they didn't fact check or whatever, or they just want to be a part of the conversation, right? There's a lot of reasons why people, so the difference that we talk about is misinformation is spreading information that's not accurate, but not with the intent to do harm. And it becomes disinformation if there's a motive or an intent to do harm. And I will let Beaudine talk about the term that they use, which I think might be a better way to sum it all up. And so, yeah, I'll let Beaudine talk about that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And let me again start by congratulating you again on the great work and the important research done. It was an absolute pleasure to work with you, and especially on this important topic for us. So when we look at the term, the overarching term that we are using at NATO is information threats. Why do we do this? Because it's a bit of our umbrella term that encompasses the different tools that are out there. So Staci already mentioned that there's, of course, disinformation, but you also have information manipulation. It's just one of the many tools. And it's actually part of our new approach. We adopted in October last year NATO's new approach to counter information threats. and maybe to have a very brief breakdown of what type of things we're looking at. So first, we look at information that's harmful. Basically, we cannot look at everything that's wrong on the internet, and we should not want to do so because it would be an endless rabbit hole. There's so much out there. So it means we need to be selective. Sometimes silence is also the best approach because you don't want to give your adversary a platform. But of course, when we need to respond, it's usually about an information threat that has reach and impact. Then second, manipulative. It's not only about the wrong or hostile things that's being said about NATO, but it's also about behavior, not only purely the content that's out there. Then third, it's also about coordination. So usually it's not just one person behind it. It's an infrastructure. It's a whole ecosystem that has been built up for many years, especially when we're talking about Russia. And then lastly, intentional. So important to say that we safeguard the freedom of expression. Everyone is free to be wrong or hold opinions that we don't agree with, but it's really about this intentional manipulation of information. That's the strategy. And this is something we need to address.
Thank you. Thank you, Beaudine. So tell me, what was the impetus? You know, this study focused on youth and young adults. What was all three of you, what was the impetus for that, and how is that valuable to NATO? Staci, you want to try that?
There's a lot there.
Yeah.
You know, the impetus really started when we started to have this conversation where NATO and Riga was saying, hey, we really need to make certain we get accurate information out there. And how do we work with influencers? And how do we go about this process of doing things? And we decided, we really need to take a part in this. We really want to be included on this conversation. Since Brian and I both do research with influencers and also with, resilience. And we thought this is just kind of a perfect pairing of this. But it really, it just came about as, we all need to probably be taking a part in this and helping to limit the spread of misinformation and make certain that accurate information is being talked about, and especially when we're talking about in the political space.
Yeah, one of the blind spots, and I'll let Beaudine, I'll speak to this, so I'll go brief, Beaudine. But one of the blind spots I talked about was how do we reach those youth, young adults? And so we'd gone in to do a training on influencers, and they said, we think that influencers are probably the best way to go. We said, of course. So they really want to reach that kind of hard to reach population. I'm sure, Beaudine, you've got more information on that too.
Yeah, and Beaudine, so it's, how does NATO influence influencers who influence young people, right? That's what you're looking at.
Correct. Many thanks for that question. I think the first point I would like to make here is resilience. So it's about societal resilience. And the question is like, why should we even care about information threats? So from a NATO perspective, information threats, they may constitute national security threat as they interfere in our democratic processes, they undermine trust in government. So this is something we need to address. And resilience is at NATO's core business. It's enshrined in our Article 3 of our founding treaty, the Washington Treaty. And its resilience is basically an ability to resist and recover from big shocks. But it's very important that when we want to do this, that we do this through a whole of society approach, because everyone has to play their part and has to play a role in this. Resilience is a process. It's not really an end state. So basically it means that the more resilient you and me are, the less vulnerable we are to hostile information being spread by our adversaries, including about NATO. So the idea behind it to work with influencers is that we need people outside of our usual ecosystem to help us tell our story. And it's absolutely very useful that, of course, we are communicating ourselves as well through the established channels that we have, but also in a more engaging and appealing way, especially for the youth. It is much nicer to see some of the influencers find very creative ways on helping to tell NATO's story and thereby resonating better also with our younger audiences.
And Beaudine, just one more question about this. You mentioned in some of our pre-discussions that NATO isn't on TikTok, for example, right? And so that would be a way that you could directly, if you were, reach young people. So you necessarily need influencers to help you reach those folks. Is that right? And tell us a little bit more about that.
Many thanks for that question. No, so it's absolutely true. So we have our established channels, of course, through which we communicate. It's Instagram, it's Facebook, it's X. So there are many out there. But our younger generations are the future. And where is the future and the younger people nowadays? They are on TikTok. I see it myself. My nephews, they get their information more from TikTok than from news outlets, for example. This is a bit concerning, though. However, NATO itself, we are not on TikTok. We're not there yet. But as you say, our influences are. So even though we are not directly on the platform, we are working together with many different influencers who have that reach on their TikTok accounts, so that we can make sure that our story is also on that platform and that we have a voice there. Why is this important? Because if we do not tell our story and if we don't have support from the content creators we're working with to tell our stories, someone else is going to tell the story for us. And often this is not someone with the greatest intentions about framing that story about NATO. So this is why we work together with a lot of influencers and content creators. We really need to make sure that we reach these younger audiences and that they receive the information that is accurate and factual about NATO.
Terrific. Thank you.
One of the things we actually found in our research is that this younger group has this unconditional trust of influencers, which means they'll just probably follow and won't fact check. And so if, they don't want you to script it for them, but if you don't give them some talking points and some accurate information, a lot of times, they won't check it. And a lot of times influencers just want to be a part of the conversation as well. And so there is got to be this relationship between, government agencies and entities, and how are they going to provide this accurate information without scripting it? Because it still needs to be authentic. It still needs to be their information, the way that they want to share it, but it needs to come from somewhere that it needs to be accurate. And NATO is a great place for that. But we also found in our research too that this low income or these marginalized communities, as well as youth, are really susceptible to this misinformation and not, either not having the time or not, not necessarily fact checking it.
So Staci, you started there. Let's get into the meat of the research and the insights that came out of it. Brian as well, of course. So how does AI created content sort of perpetuate the spread of disinformation, misinformation, and information threats? How is AI involved in that?
Yeah, I think we all assume that it's really involved, right? We've all had our experiences where AI has hallucinated things, everything from, news stories and journal articles, and everything you look into, it'll create new things. And I've even had instances where I'm trying to figure things out, and I play around with it, and I say, no, that's not there. You need to look closer to what's there. So I think anecdotally, it's a huge threat. AI is a huge threat to it. However, in our research that we did as part of this study with the Page Center, when we met with them and the board, they said, well, why don't we look into AI and influencers too? So we put that in there, and we're with Angela Dwyer and Full Intel. And this research we looked at, so the misinformation going on during the US presidential race, we were surprised. We looked at 60 some odd influencers, did a random sample of content around certain topics, and we found a really small percentage that were using AI. We ran through an AI checker. In fact, it was so small, it was 1% was actually AI generated. Now, the AI generated content, 20% of it was misinformation. And so, okay, so the anecdote might be right? The AI can and probably does create misinformation, but from our, evidence from our study says that influencers probably aren't, or at least in 2024 during the presidential, candidacy, they probably weren't using it, and may not be using it. And from a theoretical standpoint, we can go back to the point that influencers care about their credibility. they care a lot about how they're seen. So they want control over that content, which is a major factor in effective influencer relations, is allowing that control. And so, yeah, AI can help create content, but influencers might be more inclined to create their own stuff. And even if they're using AI, they're fact checking perhaps. So
Mhm.
we're not seeing it yet, but that was one case. We can keep looking. I'm sure we'll find other things.
And so, Brian, it's for their own credibility, right? As influencers, you lose your credibility if you pluck something from AI and begin to spread it, right? So maybe
Mhm.
we were looking in your study at a group of people that are more astute
Mhm.
at spotting and
Yeah.
eliminating AI misinformation, disinformation. So that's kind of interesting. Brian, in that study, what kind of influencers are you talking about? Who are they? I mean, what kind of,
Yeah.
you know,
We use specifically influencers who are speaking on Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, and
okay,
on specific areas, and we chose different areas of misinformation everywhere from Kamala's ethnic heritage to Trump's the shooting is what we looked at for Trump,
right.
and the announcement of the candidacy for Kamala Harris, but or that the shooting being faked. And so I think you're right. I think there was a large percentage of people who were very astute at what they were trying to communicate. And it was, not very strong among those influencers. But when we did this case, we looked at a grouping of influencers. They had to speak on those topics, and we also looked at a random sample of different types of influencers. So we looked at micro, we looked at macro influencers, we looked at
Right.
mega influencers, right? What we did find actually, if we kind of parsed it out, that misinformation was more likely to come from people who were on the smaller side of followers. And if you follow along with micro and macro and mega and so on, it's number of followers, which may or may not be the greatest way to look at choosing an influencer. That's a different topic for a few minutes from now. But on the micro side, micro are more likely to have misinformation than the others. So we did have a nice sample, but obviously the case was a big effect there too.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of good news too, Brian, when you think about it, right? That
We hope so.
maybe and there are
Yeah, cross your
influencers
fingers.
that, yeah, exactly. You can lean on for good information. I just want to remind our viewers that you can put some questions in the chat for our speakers today, and we'll get to them as we go, and then we'll have some Q&A at the end. So, Beaudine, I want to ask you about, I think our viewers would be, I know I am, very interested in how NATO uses AI in your strategic communications, because everybody's wrestling with this. And an organization as important, as global as NATO, I think we could learn some lessons. So how are you all thinking about AI and what you do with communications?
Yes, happy to shed some light on that. I mean, there is no silver bullet when it comes to artificial intelligence, and of course, we need to keep up the pace because it's a vast, developing area. Um, Artificial intelligence can be of tremendous help, but there are two sides of the coin, of course. It's also a big risk, especially when our adversaries use it for malign information activities in the information space. And maybe also a question for the group, if I may also do that. I'm wondering how many seconds you think AI needs of your voice to automate it in a fake message. You can just shoot something in the chat. Very, very curious to see some of the responses. How many seconds do you think that it takes? I will come back to the answer. So how we expose ourselves on a daily basis using social media. Everyone checks their phones on like within 5 minutes waking up. Oh, I see some response, by the way. I saw someone. I think, Melissa, you're closest to the correct response because it's 3 seconds, actually. 3 seconds
Wow.
it only takes for our AI to automate it in a fake message. No, and I think it's very important that we are aware of the risk online, but more importantly, what can you and I actually do to make sure we are safer online? And also, what is NATO's role in that? So to come back to the part where artificial intelligence can be helpful and how we use it at NATO headquarters, To give an example from Ukraine, they, for example, have created a spokesperson out of artificial intelligence. So this is a positive example that is stemming from artificial intelligence. And on our side, we are using artificial intelligence. So I'm working together closely with a team that is consisting out of data scientists and analysts. And what they do is they scan the information landscape with help from AI. And this is 110 million websites on a daily basis to really understand the conversation that is happening there about NATO, like who's saying what, who's driving it, what are the comments, what's the sentiment. And AI is really useful for that. So again, for NATO, it's very important that we maintain our technological edge, and we need to keep up with these fast moving technologies. So it's also not only important to work with artificial intelligence, but we also need to make sure that we keep investing in artificial intelligence, the technologies, but also in the people who know how to navigate through that system.
Excellent. Thank you. So we're getting some excellent questions on the chat. I'm going to go back to Brian. And there's a question from Betsy Emmons that was super interesting about micro and macro. And I'm curious what your working definition is of micro and macro. And are there ways to know how many followers are bots on influencers? So you really have two questions there.
Yeah, so Staci and I, along with I think the rest of academia, tend to focus on the influencer follower count to determine whether micro, macro. And so I think that the generic way to look at it is you've got, and there are variations, but we defined it. We didn't do nano, by the way. Nano influencers about 1 to 10,000. And so 10,000 followers to about 100, that's a big jump. That's usually the micro approach. And then for macro, it's 100,000 to 1 million. And then from there, the mega or million or more. And so it really is follower count. That isn't the most effective way to do things. Our research didn't show that was the most effective way to do things. In fact, and Staci can speak to this when we talk about the fit of influencers and how do government communicators, and how should we be looking at that fit, because the number of followers really isn't the most effective.
And bots, Brian?
Oh yeah, the bot. Sorry, I missed that one. That's a technological question. I think the assumption that we have bot followers is there, and so identifying bots through different apps and whatnot is not too hard to do.
I saw the other day on the crisis related to Cracker Barrel's new logo in the United States. Cracker Barrel being a restaurant chain, sort of old school, and they changed their logo and took out some of there was an old grandfather, I guess, sitting next to a barrel, and it became political. But I saw that like 45% of the posts about that were bots. So they're perpetuating and driving discussions based on someone's agenda. At least, I teach crisis communication, so I watch that as well. I do want to go to one more question before, Staci, we come back to you to talk more about the research, because it's from one of our board members, John Anoda, who sits on the Page Center board, but he asks a good question, which is, do you have any examples of misinformation and the potential consequences of it to help listeners sort of envision the stakes here that we're talking about? I don't know if Beaudine, if that's the kind of thing, what would be an example of an information threat that NATO would respond to?
Many thanks for that question. So maybe it's good to mention that we directly attribute Russia. We have the NATO Setting the Records trade portal. If you're not familiar with it, please go and check it out. And this is where we actually debunk a couple of most common lies about NATO. So that NATO is an aggressor, that NATO is trying to encircle Russia, that Russia is at war with NATO in Ukraine. And these are all statements that are not true, which we try with factual information to debunk on our portal. Maybe one other example that I can mention is that something we've seen in the build-up to the Russian reinvasion in Ukraine. There were a lot of voices coming from Russia saying that there was no build-up on a military, from a military point of view. There were a lot of theories about Nazism, etc. But when coming back to the military buildup, Russia denying that this was the case, what NATO did is we actually declassified intelligence. And I must admit that's a very, very long process because we need on a consensus-based way forward from every ally the green light in order to be able to declassify that type of intelligence. But it worked. And after that, we could showcase to our audiences that, hey, what is being said online by the Russian, this hostile piece of information, is absolutely not true, because we can provide you with the accurate and factual information that tells you otherwise. So I think this was one of the important things that we have seen in the past period.
Thank you. That's really interesting. And high consequence, as John asked, high stakes, certainly. So Staci, we sort of veered away a little bit, but we're going to come back to you, Brian, to talk about the research. So how does AI, content and the spread by influencers, how does it create information threats? And what did you find in the research that you did?
Sure. Yeah. No, to kind of maybe spin off a little bit of that when we were talking about the macro, micro, and micro, and talking about, it's not necessarily about how many followers they have. It's more about what reach they have. One of the things we found was, that you really need to go local. And we had actually one individual that we interviewed talked about, they inside. In one of the Ukrainian cities, there was an area where they were concerned that there were Russian spies in their neighborhood. And so they tried to, help this group, this apartment building, but it was really difficult to reach them and to have a discussion with them. And so they found that they really had to go local. They wouldn't want to use, someone who had a lot of followers, because this group was already feeling, that uncertain about a situation where they felt like there were spies in their building. And so they started to have to go and use different things. They had to use WhatsApp groups. They had to start to use flyers and town halls and, kind of going back to this local way of spreading information so that they can make certain that the information was accurate. And so, sometimes, when we it's a good idea to keep it local, because once you start to, go something that's more national, it starts to escalate something to where it becomes like this, emergency situation. But if we can keep that local and in country, like we had with this, apartment building where they thought that there were, Russian spies in their building. And the only way that they could combat that misinformation was with someone who was local, who was actually in that situation with them, who they trusted. And so that is really something that's really important, more so than number of followers, is their impact and their reach within the area that they are communicating. But to go to go ahead, Gary.
No, go ahead, Staci. I do, let me intersperse here just one thing that I should have asked earlier. Beaudine, who are these influencers that you want to make sure what do they do? Have accurate information? What do they do for a living? Are they government officials? Are they?
Absolutely not.
Yes, I could say bloggers. Are they? Who,
He's like, no, that is not our target audience.
Yeah.
No. I mean, I think I can say that there are enough middle-aged people walking around the NATO headquarters who can fill up that position. But no, mostly when we work together with influencers, we try to select influencers from across our 32 member states. So basically, to give a little bit of background, we have been dealing with a campaign that we organized. It's called Protect Your Future. We've been running this since 2022. And we've collaborated already with 100 plus content creators. And what does the campaign do? It really focuses on younger audiences. We work together with content creators. So what we try to do is make sure that we focus on member states that have low youth awareness and maybe support for NATO. And then we try to engage those audiences through relatable, creator-led storytelling. So to give you maybe two examples, we have many more, but I have them here. We have worked together with an American influencer, Preston Stew. Maybe you guys know him. He's very big on YouTube, 700K plus followers. He's a US Army veteran. and he's really specializes in military history, national security. But then we, for example, also have an influencer from Ukraine / the UK. It's Max Klimenko. Some of you might know him. He is very big on TikTok. He has almost 7 million followers. And he's really known for making very complex topics easy to digest. And he uses his career letter, culture letter type of video where he interviews different people trying to guess what their jobs are. And we had him over during the NATO Youth Summit in Budva this year, where he was doing an interview with our Deputy Secretary General, Radmila Shekarinska. I always butcher her name. I'm so sorry. Let me maybe also be clear that we absolutely do not pay our influencers. We just offer them the unique opportunity to come to NATO headquarters or a youth summit, experience the alliance for themselves, giving them an authentic voice, and so that they can share NATO's story in their own authentic way. And sometimes we also let them be part of a different part of a military exercise. Of course, not the classified stuff. That's something we're not going to do, but that they can see for themselves, like, what is it? How does it work? So that's been very, very successful so far.
Excellent, excellent.
That
All right, I
aligns.
want to come.
I would say that
Staci,
aligns
go
with our
ahead.
research. It aligns with our research that we found, right? That a lot of these influencers, they want to come and experience things, and they don't want it scripted. And so instead of just throwing money at them, maybe making special experiences, special certificates, even that say that they're a certified government influencer, and that giving them resources and training is something that they really want, and it really helps with the misinformation.
Well, what leads influencers to spread information threats? What did you find in your research? What's in it for them?
Yeah, we actually found that there are multiple types well, okay, this is from working in our research, types of influencers that as we were mentioning earlier, that go beyond simply the number of followers. In fact, we were able to, with our discussions with people we interviewed and worked with, that there might be 3 types, and some of these types have some interesting names. They didn't come from us; they came from people we talked to. But we have the simple misinformed, who are those who just they're not trying to do anything harmful. They just don't know, and they didn't do their best, but they're trying, right? The second one, this came from somebody else, not our quote, was the term useful idiot. And the useful idiots are those who are so focused on getting in on the conversation. They're not doing their due diligence. They don't care to do their due diligence on whether that information is faulty or not. And so they're useful in that. A lot, what we found out from our research is a lot of foreign powers can use them a lot easier. Because they're just trying to get in that space and be heard, and go viral. And then the final ones are those who are the deliberate propagandists, those who are malignant in their approach to, I'm trying to subvert the narrative.
Interesting. Okay, so we have about 20 minutes left. So I want to get to, there's a question here that leads us to that sort of 4th section on imperatives for practitioners. And it's, given the findings of your study, what suggestions would you offer to public relations professionals and communicators who are currently dealing with AI-driven disinformation targeting their clients? Are there any established best practices, or is this still an emerging area that needs more study? Brian and Staci?
Yeah, I was gonna say we actually found like a number of critical practices that we can use. And of course, it is still evolving, and we're definitely going to be adding to this research. But one of the things we found was to select the right influencer, determine like a good fit. Someone who's kind of already having this discussion. They're already talking about this. They've kind of, already been in the pre-crisis involvement. They're not just starting to talk about it when a crisis happens. And I think Beaudine spoke to this, right? I mean, working with influencers that they already know that have a good YouTube following, or that are already in that space. And that's especially important when you're in this like political area. And then we talked a little bit about going local with our apartment building and Russian spies, which was a quite fascinating story. And then Beaudine and I also talked about this with investing influencers, giving them some sort of incentive, because a lot of times they are just doing this on their own, right? They're not receiving money from NATO. And I don't know that that would be the best approach anyways, because then it would seem like it was scripted from NATO. And that's definitely what they don't want, right? They want to work with NATO and they want not to script it, right? They want it to be brief. They want it for authenticity, and they definitely want you to educate them. Though they're seeking. I don't think they're trying to, for the majority. There are, like we just talked about, there are 3 different types. But those who are already talking in this space and already in that space, they're not trying to spread misinformation. They want accurate information, and they're seeking that. And so anything that government communicators can do to reach out to influencers who are already in the space and say, hey, let's partner together, come to this event, come be a part of this discussion, so that then it's this authentic conversation rather than here's the things we want you to talk about and you should cover these points. That really doesn't work well in that environment. And it's not really, it's not a great relationship, because it is a relationship. It's an ongoing relationship. It's not just a one-time, hey, here's the information, here's the experience. We want them to continue to have that relationship as it moves forward, right? As different crises evolve. Brian, I'll let you add some in here too.
Yeah, there's a couple other things we found with our research, and that was that the tendency, especially from the government side, is to say we know what's best. So just believe us and just talk about this stuff. You can't do that. You can't be a big brother. It doesn't work that way. You do have to not be that gatekeeper of truth. Instead, offer them verifiable information and evidence. You want to avoid that arrogance that you know everything. I know Staci talked about building a relationship, but there's other instances where you don't have to work with influencers. You can become an influencer yourself. In fact, we had one example of one of our interviewees who ended up creating programs for high school kids to build that resilience. He did a comic book, he did video games, things like that.
Fascinating. So cool. Like, to take the time and effort to do that. I mean, to become an influencer yourself and then to create content. Anyways, go ahead, Ryan. I just thought
No. Yeah, it was a really cool story. And if you I mean, what do you do as a communicator, whether in government or not, to approach some of this? I know a lot of questions in the chat I've been following have asked like imperatives and things. So if you're not working with influencers, there are other things you can do. And I think that Beaudine talked about this a little bit, but the idea is to pre-bunk the information, not debunk it necessarily. Debunking isn't effective, but proactive storytelling is. And so the imperative is to build that narrative ahead of time, so that you're not reacting or overreacting to the information threats. So pre-bunking is like audience priming, education, media literacy, that kind of stuff. But if you must debunk, and there's instances where you have to debunk, you have to pick and choose. You can't counter everything. Think about reach, impact, and strategic importance. Avoid absolutes and use the usual stuff. Use bigger words like not at this time, things like that. Be careful of labeling influencers as dissenting voices or as extremists or enemies, because that backfires and makes them look better than you. So you do want to have some kind of influence there with the influencers are out there, but you don't want to label them as being bad people. We also have talked a lot about this, and it's reaching those who are most effective to reach. What we term the movable middle. If you're in the political arena, it's the swing voters. The extremes are going to be the extremes, right? And so you want to speak to those who are undecided, or this passive majority, and avoid that kind of true believer fringe. But those are kind of some of the main areas that implications that. Go ahead.
But finally, the most important is tone matters. You have to be a human. You have to be respectful. You have to, you have to be a real person. And remind yourself that this is a relationship space, and that tone really does matter.
Yeah, so I was going to ask, Beaudine, how do you interact with the influencers? Is it a face-to-face conversation? Is it, something like this where you talk to them on Zoom? Is it having a cup of coffee?
It's everything. It's
Okay.
basically everything. It can go from having a meeting on Zoom and inviting them to the NATO headquarters to meet the Secretary General. It's inviting them to different NATO events like the Youth Summit. We had also a youth advisory board here at NATO consisting out of a lot of influencers who really had a firsthand experience it and a look inside our kitchen on how everything is going here. So there are really many ways to approach this. But I think echoing all the points of Brian and Staci, I think it's really important indeed to be proactive, because pre-bunking and filling up that information space already with accurate and factual information, it's not the most sexy thing, but it's the most effective thing. And this is something we really need to pursue. And it's like my boss always says, with hostile information, it's the adversary throwing spaghetti against the wall and see what sticks. And this is basically their approach. So by proactively filling up that space and working together with influencers, it really helps us to increase awareness about, hey, what does NATO stand for? What is its role? What is its mission? Why should we care? And I think, to throw some numbers at you, in 2024 and 2025, we had a reach of 276 million views, and we had 1,900 pieces of unique content, and it evolved around topics of Ukraine and defense spending. So for us, really, the next step is embedding creators across NATO communications to make sure we continue to reach these diverse audiences. We need to, as Staci said, relationships is everything. So we need to build lasting partnerships with these content creators and really widen the pool, because there are probably already so many people we don't work with yet that we should do. So there's many things out there, and what it all comes down to is strengthening our defenders community.
That's great. You know, I try to teach, and when I'm teaching young people about public relations, it's not what you see on TV or in the movies. It's really what you just described, right? It's about building relationships of trust with publics, stakeholders, whatever you want to call them. And that's where the good work of public relations gets done. And not at the debunking stage, as Brian talked about. I do want to ask Staci and Brian, though, about, you guys did you did a training session for NATO. Can you tell us a little bit about that? And in fact, one of our questions online is, are you going to do some more collaboration to create a guide on what you found? I know we've talked about this in our pre-calls, but tell us about training and, you know, what comes next.
Yeah, we would love to. Oh my goodness, yes. We had such a good experience working with NATO. And Beaudine, you can probably speak to this as well. Like some of the things they're doing with their youth, like they're involving this younger age group and inviting them to come and be a part of the conversation, and inviting them to be influencers and have a voice. And you know, yes, we would love to continue this conversation and create a guidebook for government influencers. Yeah, but Beaudine, speak to, I mean, it's really amazing what you all do. And kind of, you know, yes, of course, we feel honored to work with them, and we would love to moving forward.
And before we jump into Beaudine, one of the outcomes of this research is to do a guidebook that we're working on. And that was what the NATO Center of Strategic Communication really wanted as well. But yeah, go ahead, Beaudine, please tell us.
No, thanks so much. And I think, of course, it's a living document, because we always need to make sure that we adapt to the new developments that are out there. But I think another point that I want to make is that there are so many great initiatives out there, and we need to make sure that we tap into the right ones, and that we make sure that we strengthen our cooperation, because ultimately most of us are working towards the same goal. And by aligning our efforts and to make sure that we understand what we're all doing, I think by doing it together, we stand so much stronger, and we should never underestimate the power that we have in making sure that also we help strengthen that resilient information landscape.
You know, it seems overwhelming at times, though, doesn't it, for communicators? You know, there's been so many, you know, truth decay, people call it, and other things. So, Beaudine, I'm glad you said that, is that there's nobody in a better position than researchers around these issues, practitioners, to fight disinformation, because communications is at the center of the big social economic challenges that we have. And you can pick any issue, and it's about communication. and establishing relationships. So Brian and Staci, I know you wanted to talk about this as well, this idea of sort of a call to action for communicators around mis and disinformation. What are your thoughts on that? How can communicators sort of take point?
Yeah, no, I would love, like, come a part of the conversation. NATO has fabulous resources and they can speak to that. But the Page Center also has several things that they do to help. They have some modules on their site that talks about misinformation and how to deal with that. And so I would access those resources. But I do think that, those of us who do research and those of us work in practice, that we should be working together. We should come together and speak about how can we make this better? How can we influence the space so that we do limit the amount of misinformation that is spread? But I'll let Brian speak to this as well. But, Page Center has some fantastic resources available, and I hope they will share those in the chat so that everyone can find them.
Yeah, they shared it. If you haven't looked there in the chat, just posted something. And I'm also going to kind of couple this with some of the things I'm seeing in the chat, things like measuring impact of influencer-based efforts, reduce misinformation, and monitoring and things like that. I think that it's on the onus is on us. I know this is a very strong practitioner and research community, and you don't have to be working in university to do this kind of stuff. Research is important, and getting the word out about how are you measuring, what is the impact, getting that research done. I mean, that's some of the stuff we're working on as well. And we know there's a lot of other people out there. The more research out there, the better. And moving from just keeping it in a journal. I'm a journal editor, so I'm not saying anything negative by that. Journals are great, but we need more stuff like this. Really excited the Page Center did this. We need webinars. We need stuff people can come and we can have these conversations like we have with Beaudine and practitioners, researchers get together and have these conversations. So I think that's the next step, is having this kind of collaboration, the scholar practitioner collaboration when we're building the narrative. I think it's fantastic.
So we have a few minutes left, and I want to try to get to two questions here that are in the chat. One is about how you measure this. Brian, you mentioned that, right? How do we measure the effectiveness of influencer-based efforts to fight misinformation? Any metrics that are meaningful right now that, or do we need to do more work on that?
I think we need more work. I mean, you can go with metrics. I think in the chat, people had mentioned things like likes and comments and things are very bot driven, so that's difficult to measure. And so even a qualitative approach, Staci and I have done a lot of research on semantic network analysis. And looking where the conversations are going, I think that's the best metric. It isn't how many people have said this or how many have said that. It's what's the dominant narrative and how do you measure that narrative on whatever given topic, whether we're talking about the Ukrainian and Russian conflict, or if we're talking about stuff like corporate branding and an incorrect narrative there, right? It's following that conversation and measuring the dominant narrative rather than saying how many people are talking about this versus that.
Excellent. Beaudine, I do want to ask you one last question, and it's from the chat, and it's just to clarify what you're doing. It's NATO is inviting influencers to events to get them to care about not spreading misinformation, ? They're not being recruited, trained to promote media literacy. But I think we're talking about sort of the same thing, aren't we? We're talking about the pre-bunking stuff, and media literacy certainly is a part of that.
Yes, no, exactly. So maybe just to clarify, when we do invite influencers to our events or to NATO headquarters, we let them experience NATO for themselves. And what they see, they will share with their audiences in their own authentic way, being it standing on the career ladder and asking different questions to our Deputy Secretary General, or doing it in other ways. When it comes to media literacy, we, for example, at the Youth Summit, I was there to give a workshop to a room full of young people on how to stay safe online, because of course the communicators need to align their efforts and approaches, but what it all comes down to is you and me. And what I was discussing there with the younger people as well is like, what do you do? What do you see? And it's really simple when you look at the different steps that we can take to counter information threats to make sure we're not part of the problem. And this is to check the tone. Also, as Staci mentioned, a lot of times check the image, check your own bias, see what type of source is being used. If it's all around in more mainstream media and it's by a legitimate outlet, you can see that it's much more trustworthy than it's from a website that is not known saying a certain thing that you're not sure of. So there are simple steps that we can all take to make sure that we stay safe online. But yes, media literacy also starts within member states themselves. A good example is that Finland has a curricula in their high schools on how to spot disinformation. So from a government perspective, there's also a lot of best practices and lessons learned.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Finland, Beaudine, because we had a question about Finland. So thank you for, we didn't get to all the questions, but we tried to get to as many as we can. And by the volume of questions we received, obviously a lot of research, interest in this research and the topic. It's, really is. Someone asked, how will this change in the next 5 years? Boy, what a good question. Who would have thought we'd be in this position 5 years ago, really?
If I can add something, Gary, real quick, I know we're out of
go
time.
ahead, Brian.
But some of these points, we talk about things that NATO and other governments are doing. We talk about what's happening at places like Finland. We've talked about high schools, but we don't have to rely simply on government and education. Like, what are you doing from your standpoint? Let's say you own an agency, and you have people coming in, and you're hiring these young practitioners. How are you training them to spot disinformation and misinformation? Because I think we've all been susceptible to it, right? And so, are you taking that responsibility to train those and not think, well, I'm sure it happened in high school, or I'm sure their parents told them, or I'm sure someone did this. Don't assume that, right? We take what is in our area. Maybe you've done a lot of research in this area. Organize something within your community about that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's well said, Brian. It's well said, and the need for it is only going to increase. That's for sure. Well, thank you. This has been an excellent discussion. Thank you to all of you, and thanks to our viewers for joining us.
May I add two more things? Two more things.
Go ahead.
So sorry,
go ahead.
Gary. So sorry, Gary. No, because I see that there are a lot of questions out there, and I just want to make sure that I refer everyone who's interested also to our NATO website, because we have there a fact sheet on our new approach on how to counter information threats, and it outlines on what we're doing. So if you're interested and I did not manage to answer your question, please go and check it out. Have a look also for the portal. And a last comment, be part of our Defenders community. It would be absolutely great if you could already share within your close environment that you were part of this conversation, how you gained insights from it, with what questions you were left. So be a NATO ambassador and spread the word.
Exactly. Be a NATO influencer, huh? Okay.
Exactly.
Let's
Thank
all
you.
be a part of that solution, right? To accurate information. I agree.
Exactly. Okay, so I'm going to do a little Page Center commercial here at the end. We have so thank you all for being on. Really great discussion, and obviously we could go a lot longer. The Page Center has many current and upcoming initiatives in this space, including a free training module on the ethical implications of fake news for PR professionals. You can access that module at pagecentertraining.psu, standing for Penn State University.edu, along with 15 other modules on different topics. Thanks again, everybody. Beaudine, Staci, Brian, you guys were fantastic. Thanks for everybody for watching. This has been taped, and so if you want to pass it along to somebody, this has been recorded who couldn't make it today, please do so. It's a really important discussion. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.